Joyful, engrossing, and at times frustrating, Asgard's Wrath is an adventure full of stunning environments and exhilarating combat that occasionally becomes strained, stretched thin from a repetitiveness that feels like an overcompensation. Developed by Sanzaro Games exclusively for Oculus Rift and published by Oculus Studios, Asgard's Wrath gives the platform an enjoyable, lift-flawed Metroidvania hack-and-slash that's tons of fun to get lost in, though I wouldn't go so far as to declare it a proverbial killer app. Asgard's Wrath's foundational concept is sound, but its inability to evolve past that concept, paired with a barrage of resources for crafting and upgrading your equipment, along with an abundance of mindless time-killing side quests and challenges, is really where Asgard's Wrath gets into trouble. But for the most part, Asgard's Wrath stands as a solid action adventure that runs beautifully in VR, and for which the good outweighs the bad. Set in the aloof and prideful world of Norse mythology, Asgard's Wrath is a universe you might be familiar with, taking you to places like Midgard and Asgard and including mythical characters like Loki and Thor. It evokes memories of 2018's God of War by Studio Santa Monica, while hitting its own mark with fantastic art design and music, intense melee combat, and some really creative design. Whether this is your first foray into VR or you're a longtime owner, Asgard's Wrath will effectively mesmerize you. Story sequences play out right before you and are an absolute thrill to watch. Voice acting and animations are fantastic and a testament to the kind of storytelling potential VR has. Facial animations specifically are awesome to watch, and while by its nature it's an active VR game, Sanzaro added a good amount of accessibility options for players who need them. Cast as a newly formed god referred to only as the Animal God, you appear just in time to aid Loki, famed shapeshifter and trickster, in a fight with the Kraken. In response, Loki takes you under his wing, and in his tutelage, it's your quest to follow his teachings, gain strength, and confront the conniving, power-hungry gods of Asgard by playing spoiler to their machinations. Played across 5 worlds, each world has a unique hero the Animal God possesses, all with their own personalities, equipment, and stories. So while your interactions with the Asgardians serve as a central plot, each hero has their own subplot in their own world. It forms a really enjoyable anthology of sorts, telling relatively short, digestible tales of courage, vengeance, and greed. Ingrid, for example, the first playable hero, is a shield maiden who lost her brother to Tyr, the god of war. You set out to help her in her quest to defeat Tyr and avenge the loss of her brother. In its totality, Asgard's Wrath isn't the most robust or complex story, but it is, for the most part, well written. It's charming and campy, but also takes itself serious enough that it kept me engaged and interested. Sanzaro does a nice job building their own world from source material that's gained a lot of pop culture prominence just in the last few years. Gameplay itself is sort of split into 3 categories: the heroes you possess, your god form, and anthropomorphic animal followers. Levels are fairly linear, but include puzzles, treasure chests, and plenty of opportunities for backtracking once you've acquired new weapons and abilities. Your first time playing a level is done with a specific hero, but once you complete it, the area is revitalized, adding new enemies, treasure chests, and the ability to swap between heroes at will. The animal god and those it possesses form a kind of symbiotic relationship. Most of your time will be spent playing as one of the heroes you control, but other times you'll need to switch to god form, done by holding Y, which puts the camera into the sky and gives you a bird's eye view of your surroundings. In god form, your giant god hands allow you to manipulate certain pieces of the environment, you can pick up and manually move followers, and just in general get a better look around. While I obviously can't speak for anyone else, it's impressive how well this transition works. I didn't experience a second of discomfort while switching between the first-person view and the bird's eye view, which you'll have to do quite often. Not to mention, it's just really cool to snap between 2 completely different perspectives and explore around in VR. Finally, there's your animal followers, loyal AI companions that'll aid you in combat and have specific abilities you'll need to progress through levels and solve puzzles. Each follower is transformed from an animal by the animal god, hence the name. Followers have either ranged attacks or melee attacks, but not both, which is important to keep in mind during combat and puzzles. Bjornhild, for instance, is an axe-wielding bear that can take damage and freeze enemies. Her special ability allows her to carry tree stumps and set them on platforms, which may activate anything from doors to elevators. Followers look, move, and sound incredible. Toss them health and they'll catch and use it. Give them a thumbs up and they'll reciprocate. Keep them from dying during combat and their attitude toward you increases, signified by a high five or fist fist bump. Happy followers find loot and send it directly to your inventory, which isn't only helpful during combat, but keeps resources flowing your way during more relaxed segments. Unfortunately, in a somewhat disappointing manner, puzzles tend to be rather straightforward. Rare is a puzzle that's more complex than just seeing an obstacle and summoning the follower who can interact with it. Once I had a grip on just how dynamic this system was between hero, god form, and follower, it seemed imminent Asgard's Wrath would eventually deliver puzzles that heavily involved each one. But for the most part, things stayed pretty simple. Solutions aren't always obvious, but I'm not sure Asgard's Wrath ever takes full advantage of the possibilities god form provides. While you're not out adventuring, you'll be spending time at Aegir's Hall, a drinking hole popular among the denizens of Asgard. Aegir's Hall acts as your hub, where you'll upgrade equipment, stock up on health items like potions or food, have a go at one of two minigames, and read from the World Tree Codex, which contains a summary of your adventure as well as lore about the surrounding world. Again, Sinzaro shows off some serious talent here. The ambience is a nice break away from the gloomy dangers of the outside world, and just entering menus is cool. For example, to upgrade equipment, you'll have to interact with Sindri and Brock. The hero you're upgrading appears on an anvil next to you, and to view your most recent upgrades, you switch to them and have your perspective changed completely. Sindri goes from big to the size of a mountain. Each hero has weapons and armor only they can wear that you can craft or upgrade, and all your followers can be upgraded too. But all the different resources you'll have to scavenge in order to upgrade and craft everything, along with managing your carrying capacity, becomes a bit of an unnecessary grind. This, I think, is an example of an overcompensation in Asgard's Wrath. Between resources, side quests, and challenges, there's a lot that Asgard's Wrath could whittle away at. Many side quests aren't so much quests as they are tasks, things like upgrade your follower or read the codex, and challenges feel pretty similar, light all the torches or hit all the targets in a given time limit. It's busy work, content for the sake of content, and can be a little overwhelming during your first few hours. Luckily, you can beat Asgard's Wrath without having to delve too far into the upgrade tree, which does lessen the impact all this busy work has. Outside combat, you can fast travel at any time, and Aegir's Hall has a storage chest you can pack full of extra material. Crafting and upgrading doesn't require you have the material directly on your person. So as superfluous as some of this content feels, it's more or less balanced out by player-friendly design. You can even press X and Y to quickly switch between Sindri, your chest, and Elodia, Aegir's Hall's merchant, ridding you of constantly having to walk between them. Once again though, I can't help but wish that some of this content would be replaced with more robust, less time-killing activities and puzzles. I eventually decided to mainline story quests and found my experience much more enjoyable. The emphasis on quantity over quality is palpable and somewhat disappointing. But where we find the best and worst elements of Asgard's Wrath are in its combat. In general, combat is excellent. It's an active and challenging system that hinges quite a lot on your skill as a fighter, which hero you choose to play as, and leaves room for a few different fighting styles. Heroes have 4 slots for weapons, shields, and other equipment, and all weapons can be thrown, but only certain weapons can be summoned directly back to your hand. For example, Stick-On, a late-game hero, has a serrated double-edged sword that can be split into 2 short swords, meaning you can either throw the entire sword or split it and throw one half. Ingrid, on the other hand, has an axe she can throw or dual wield along with her own sword. Both heroes can summon their weapons back to their hands, but Stick-On's blades are linked, which limits the range of his throw. Ingrid's axe can be thrown farther, but doesn't have the same versatility as Stick-On's blade. Furthermore, once upgraded, Stick-On's blade can cause poison damage while Ingrid's axe causes fire damage, and each weapon is used to get past certain obstacles. Everything is equipped on your physical body, so switching between weapons happens as quickly as you can move your hands, and you can equip health and other items in an in-game radial menu for quick access. Between swords, shields, bows, crossbows, and other weapons, along with whatever combination you decide to wield, combat becomes dynamic and a lot of fun. Enemies can and will block your attacks, and you can block their attacks as well by raising your weapon or shield in the direction they're attacking. You'll need to be patient, keep your distance, and wait for an opportunity to strike. Stand too close and enemies will knock you back with a kick or headbutt. For attacks that can't be be blocked or when an enemy throws a weapon at you, pressing A dashes your character in the direction you're moving, useful for dodging or quickly hitting an enemy. Now, some enemies have runic armor, which is impenetrable to normal attacks. In order to destroy runic armor, you have to block attacks until an enemy's rage meter is filled, represented by a red line above their head, and they attempt a signature attack, telegraphed when their head bursts into red flames. Parry their signature attack, and you can hit them and destroy their runic armor, turning them into a normal enemy. In a vacuum, this mostly works. Parrying a signature attack requires you time your block perfectly. Block too early or in an inaccurate orientation, and you'll take damage and the enemy will keep their runic armor. Getting the timing down is pretty tricky and takes some practice. It took me a while before I was proficient, and even now there are times I have trouble getting the timing just right. But as far as basic mechanics go, combat itself in Asgard's Wrath is great, and I really enjoy it. Weapons feel right, and while tricky at first, throwing weapons is really useful. Implementation, however, is where things go awry. Asgard's Wrath constantly throws enemies with runic shields at you, and even once you get the timing down, it's time-consuming to defeat them. You're on the defensive, waiting for them to attack. Sometimes barriers appear around you, and you'll have to fight off multiple waves of enemies before you're able to advance. I understand why enemies have shields. With the amount of things you can shoot and throw, if enemies didn't have shields, you wouldn't have to get near them at all. Runic shields force you into close quarters fights, but the barriers and amount of enemies you fight often feels like padding, combat stretched for time. What's more is that for all the pieces available to you, combat doesn't get much more complex. It plateaus a few hours in and doesn't evolve much after that. There are only a few different enemy types you'll encounter, and you'll encounter them over and over again. When enemies appear, you kill any bad guys without shields and then go to work chipping away at enemies with shields. And some enemies have stronger runic shields that require more hits to deplete. Again, we see the quantity over quality problem rearing its head here too. Combat can drag on for far longer than it needs to. It's overextended and can severely disrupt pacing. If you just want to explore and complete challenges, I'd recommend setting the difficulty down to Mortal, Asgard's Wrath's easy mode, where runic shields can be destroyed by normal attacks. Otherwise, be prepared to constantly have to fight enemies that take time to defeat. Followers' usability in combat varies too. If a follower dies, their disposition toward you lowers, which halts that useful flow of resources. And while they can defeat enemies without runic shields, they can't defeat enemies with shields. Because enemies for the vast majority of fights are nice enough to attack you one at a time, I often found myself dismissing followers and taking on enemies alone. Get into a fight with multiple shielded enemies and you'll either have to defeat them super fast or risk your follower taking lots of damage. Not to mention, if an enemy with runic shields is engaged with you and your follower attacks them, it will only lengthen combat, as their shields don't deplete, but they remain essentially stun-locked from your follower's attacks, unable to unleash their signature attack, and thus unable to be killed. Asgard's Wrath surprised me and legitimately made me laugh and blew my mind multiple times, but also had me pretty frustrated too. And yet, even with all those frustrations, and after 27 hours of gameplay, I still find myself wanting to return, upgrade my heroes, and see what else I can find across its realms. It's a lesson in quantity over quality, but also a brilliant showcase of what VR can do, both from gameplay and storytelling perspectives. Without a doubt, and even with its flaws, it's among the coolest experiences I've had in VR. The combat is exhilarating, the world design is beautiful, the writing is fun, and I'm still not totally over being able to give my animal followers a thumbs up.